everyone. Welcome to lecture 47 of week 10, and the topic of today's lecture is language change. So, we have been talking about various issues related to language and society for last few classes, and today we will be talking about language change. So, you can of course say that this is a part of sociolinguistics, but you can also consider this topic under historical linguistics or historical sociolinguistics. So, we will be talking about the following topics in today's class. Initially, we will be talking about the concepts of apparent time and real time. Then we will discuss few reasons of language change. Then we will talk about the idea of sound change. Then we will learn about comparative method and wave model, which are two important models in both historical and sociolinguistics. We will talk about the idea of glottochronology next. We will also talk about sound change in progress, which we have already mentioned briefly for previous lectures, and we finally talk about change from above and below. So, here is a quick recap of the discussion session that you attended in the last class. So, in the last class, in the discussion specifically, we learnt about standardization, and I did tell you that or rather all of us told you that there is a process of standardization which has some stages. To name the stages, this is selection, codification, elaboration of function and acceptance. So, also in the class where we talked about the difference between language and standard language and dialect. So, you can say that there is a concept of dialect chain or language continuum which may exist across countries or provinces. So, when we learnt about the differences between dialect and standard, we saw that the idea of language continuum can be a little challenging for classifying them. We also talked about the pressure of standard languages which affect the non-standards in various ways. We will also be talking about them in slightly different ways in today's class. And we discussed some cases in Indian context where we saw that colonialism affected the standardization process in Bengal, and post-colonial efforts of standardization were observed in new states of India like Kerala. So, in today's class, when we talk about language change, the very first thing that we will discuss is the notion of apparent time and real time. So, if you remember, we talked about William Lebov in one class previously, and we said that Lebov's works are very important. Let me tell you that even for the studies of language change, we do consider Lebov's work and the methodology suggested by him, which are still very important in contemporary sociolinguistics. So, what is this idea of apparent time? Apparent time makes it possible to see the temporal variation in recorded data at one time. What does it mean? So, you can collect data from people of different generation at a same point of time and try to understand how language change is taking place in the society. So, it can bridge the gap between synchronic and diachronic linguistics. To specify this, synchronic linguistics is the study of language at a certain point of time, and diachronic is the study which is based on a historical idea. So, changes with time. So, it is basically bridging a gap between synchronic and diachronic, because at one point of time you are getting data of different generations which is indicating certain direction of language change. It actually helps us to understand how language change takes place. So, we will see that individuals change the frequencies of the choice of variant. So, we are actually coming back to certain ideas that we have previously discussed. We did talk about frequencies of variants, if you remember, in the class of language variation. We also talked about choice of variants. We are coming back to choice again and again, but frequencies of the choice of variant is something which is very important. So, we can say that coexistence of the variants will not indicate the language change. So, if you say that one person can use 3 or 4 different variants alternately, the examples that we have seen previously, it is actually an example of language variation, but when you are accounting for change, you need to account for either increase or decrease of the frequencies of variance. If you remember the multiple grammar hypothesis that we discussed while talking about language variation, we did talk about the changes of frequency in terms of the variance, and let me also tell you that there is this idea of constant rate hypothesis, which says that changes will actually taking place at a constant rate. So, if you take account of the frequencies of variance and find certain differences, you will be taking account of the language change in the society, rather indicate a change in progress. So, I already told you that today's class is mostly about language change. So, what do we mean by it? Let us also learn about the following bullet points. So, we can say that language change takes place across space and across social group. Remember, when we were talking about dialects, we said that there are regional and social varieties. So, we are considering both historical and geographical factors. Similarly, for language change, we are saying that language change can take place across space, and it is also possible to talk about how the change is taking place across social group. And you can think about pronunciations where there is a change of pronunciation with new generations, or you can of course say sound change when we are saying pronunciations. So, I am asking you to think about your own examples where you can figure out certain changes of pronunciation in your own speech community. Maybe you use it, maybe people from different generations at your home use them, or in neighborhood they use them. So, please think about some examples. So, when we are learning about these concepts, it is always better to think about some actual examples. Along with the sound change, you can also think about new words which are either borrowed or invented. So, I have written remember morphology, because when we discussed morphological processes, we did talk about borrowing, coinage, etc. Just to I am just helping you to remember. And meanings of old words change. So, this is a semantic change that we also indicated earlier. If you remember, there is a change in meaning as well. So, we can say that the rate of change varies, as we were talking about frequencies and a change in frequencies, but whether the rate of change varies, it is also important, but languages become different, it is something that we should also note. So, languages become different with time, and what kind of difference is there, we need to take account of it if we are planning to work on language change in a society. So, you can say that after 1000 years the languages will change so much that languages of the 2 points will not be intelligible. You already have an idea of intelligible. So, if you deal with texts which have a gap of 1000 years for any language, you will figure out that there are a lot of differences. There can be differences in terms of sounds, there can be differences in terms of morphosyntax, there can be differences in terms of semantic change as well. And I am sure you have noticed that old people often say that the language of new generation is corrupted instead of saying it is changed. So, there is it is very important for us to notice the perception, the common perception in the society, because it is important for us to learn. We are learning about doing different things with languages. It is also important for us to think about critical comments of certain popular perceptions of language. So, here is a puzzle. Language change is functionally disadvantageous. It makes communication difficult. I hope you are following what I am trying to say. It is negatively evaluated by the dominant groups. So, here I have just given example for older people, you can also think about dominant groups. But language change is inevitable in human history. It is not that people have negative perceptions, so language will freeze and it will not change. Language change is inevitable, you have to admit this. Now, the question is, why do languages change? There are a couple of reasons, let us quickly go through them. The first one is language learning. I am also using the term language learning as a cover term. Language is transmitted from one generation to other, and individuals recreate grammar based on the input from caregivers. So, here again I am asking you to recall multiple grammar hypothesis, but even if you are not considering the theory, you can think about the idea of recreation of grammar from a very simple idea that no input is identical if you consider generational changes. So, different inputs will result in certain changes in terms of the structure. It can be anything, any structural aspect can be changed. Another reason for language change is language contact. We did mention the term earlier. So, let me tell you, language contact is an important domain in sociolinguistics, and we also use this term for various other fields like typology. So, we talked about migration, and we can say that migration, invasion and trade lead to language contact. At this point, I will ask you to recall whatever we have learnt about Pidgin and Creole when we talked about multilingualism and different linguistic varieties. So, we saw that trade results in a creation of new languages, invasion will basically impose certain languages on others, and migration will help the people, or rather result in either language maintenance or shift. So, we are coming back to all these points, but now we are trying to arrange all our thoughts together when we are talking about language change. So, we can say that emergence of bilingualism or multilingualism is important in this regard. Language will always borrow sounds and words from each other as a result of language contact, and contact as a result will result in some kind of language change. So, if we talk about social differentiation, for example, different social groups adopting distinctive norms, one social group is trying to adopt a norm of a different group. So, I briefly talked about it, today I will give you another useful example to understand this concept. You can think about vocabulary, jargon, etc. And language change is a natural process. As we said, it is inevitable. We should also admit that this is a natural process, and there are internal and external sources of change. I am not explaining it, but I am sure that you have certain examples in your mind. We can say that language contact is an example of external force. So, now let us talk about sound change. Sound change is very important for us because in sociolinguistics and in historical linguistics, there is a huge amount of literature on sound change. So, there are special attentions in modeling change. Yesterday we were talking about modeling, not yesterday, in some of the classes previously we were talking about modeling language variation. So, now you can also say that we can model the systems. So, there have been attempts to model changes in phonological systems in historical linguistics. For example, development of modern Romance languages from Latin, and argument was that the sound changes are regular. Sound changes are not irregular. So, I told you that apparently the heterogeneous corpus is complex for us, but it is not random. There is always some kind of pattern which is visible to us. So, similarly sound changes have been mentioned as regular, and there have been some techniques to reconstruct the sound system. Why are we using the term reconstruct? Because we do not know the forms that have exact forms that have been used previously by people. we can only collect some data from the language as it is spoken now. So, based on the contemporary data, we can try to reconstruct the hypothetical language that was probably spoken by the ancestors. So, this is a very standard and well used method in historical linguistics. So, we basically say that we try to reconstruct or talk about unattested parent languages. What is parent languages? So, the ancestral languages. So, there is a small example here. In Hawaiian, the th sound in older forms became a k sound. So, you can say that when Europeans encountered Hawaiian, there was no th. So, maybe as a result of invasion it was changed. So, we need to take into account all the social factors involved in this regard. So, there is a very common example, many of you already know about it for middle and early modern English, the great vowel shift. So, what is this great vowel shift? Alteration of the position of all long vowels. So, you in phonetics and also partially phonology, you have learnt about different types of vowels. Now, your knowledge is actually helpful for you. So, you can say that long E becomes I in words like bite, and also for oo. So, whose became house. So, these are changes with time, and this is an example of great vowel shift. So, you have to remember at this point that a sound change can be conditioned by certain environments. So, we have to consider the environmental factors. So, I have listed some types of sound change, rather some processes of sound change. I have listed only a few, there are more. So, if you are interested, you can always go through them. So, the first one is assimilation. What does it mean? Influence of one sound to the adjacent sound. So, there are two sounds sitting next to each other, one is influencing the other. So, this is an example from Latin to French. There is another kind of process which is known as dissimilation. So, if two sounds are there in a sequence, one will become less like, they will become less like each other. So, for example, French pèlerin, which is pilgrim, to Latin peregrine. So, this is basically if you consider French and Latin data, you will understand that the la sound is actually being affected. Metathesis is change in the order of two adjacent sounds, Old English third to Modern English third. So, you can see that the position of R is R will be changed. So, it should be THRID for Old English and THIRD for Modern English, and also for Old English WASP and WAPS. So, these are examples of metathesis. So, syncope and apocope are processes where some sounds will be lost, loss of either medial or final sound. So, loss of the unstressed vowel in English word secretary. So, if you speak it, maybe we do not do it like the native speakers, because we are speakers of Indian English, but at times it is observed. And epenthesis is introduction of additional sounds like b in thimble from Old English fimble. So, we have been talking about this idea of reconstruction and ancestral language or parent language, for example. So, how do we find that some languages are related? This is a major question in the domain of language change. So, studies of systematic sound change can help us to establish relationship between languages. It is challenging, but there are efforts, there have been efforts. So, a change will happen if the language has not shifted to another language. So, language of the same branch of a family tree. So, this is known as a tree model. A family tree will be reconstructed and there is some kind of relatedness which is hypothetical, which can help us to reconstruct the older forms in order to understand the changes that took place. So, we try to reconstruct cognates. What are the cognates? Where there is some kind of similarity between forms, and we create a hypothesis that there must be some common parent to the languages. So, we try to understand language change from the cognates. There is a method called comparative method, which is used widely in historical linguistics to reconstruct the parent languages. So, we try to compare the cognates and conduct structural analysis of them, specifically in terms of sound change, and then try to reconstruct the parent forms, or the proto forms at times we call them. But there are problems. So, we should not be fooled by false cognates. We do not know that, because these are hypothetical forms, we do not know whether this is it was the actual ancestral form that we are creating after applying the comparative method for reconstruction. So, here is a point for you to think about this. What if a language has influence of other languages for sociolinguistic complexities? So, maybe you are trying to use 3 different cognates, and one of them is being influenced by a completely different language. So, what will happen? So, that is why family tree model is now criticized by sociolinguists and said that this method has limitations. So, there is another model called wave model, which is suggested by a lot of people in order to take account of the sound changes or language changes. What is this wave model? Wave account of language change is the alternative account of family tree, and in the wave approach the various changes that occur must be seen as flowing into and interacting with one another. So, it is like a wave, there are like different forms there. So, if you throw a pebble in a pond, there will be waves, right? It is exactly like that. So, it is like there are interaction between different languages, and it is not easy to reconcile the need to find contrasts with the desire to maintain a certain fluidity in boundaries. So, the boundaries are fuzzy, as we discussed previously, that the boundaries between languages are always fuzzy. We cannot say that this is the absolute analysis that we have done. So, wave model will also maintain this, that the boundaries are fuzzy and there are constant interactions, and change will take place like a wave. So, a variant of this particular change is diffuse through a language. So, diffuse I have highlighted because this is a new term for us, and it is diffuse means it will be just like moving like a wave, and there will be certain diffusion in the entire process. So, let me also introduce the idea of glottochronology, which is an alternative method in order to attest sound changes. We say that there is this idea of lexicostatistics. What is that? You basically get a small vocabulary from any language and then try to calculate the percentage of the cognate words. So, the aim is to understand the some quantitative aspect of language change. So, determination of the cognates is a problem because it depends on subjective judgments of the linguist, which can be a problem. So, the linguist may again be fooled by some false assumptions, and we have to be careful thus. So, it is also related to the genetic relationship between languages, but the method is quite useful for us if there is no alternative method which is working. There is a problem that I have pointed out. So, if you say that a proto language A splits into B and C splits into D and E undergoes a contact with a completely different language F, then what will happen? So, this is the example that I was sharing a few minutes back. So, it is very difficult to understand whether there is an external influence due to language contact. So, the study of cognates can be really challenging. So, let us also talk about some results of language change. One is dialect divergence. So, for example, you can think about any example of European languages like Spanish in New World and Old World. So, there are some differences. If you get some data from Spanish in Spain and say Mexico, you will get there are a lot of differences, also say English in UK and USA. So, there is a small suggestion for you, if you can visit ethnologue.com and try to understand the diversity of languages. Some of you are already familiar with it. Maybe it can be useful for you for other purposes as well, but at this point I will ask you to think about the possibility of locating the same language in different parts of the world. So, it will be useful. And apart from dialect divergence, there is also something called dialect convergence. So, if you consider the study of Kupwar village in India, which is a classical study done by Gumpers and Wilson in 1971. So, they talked about convergence of Indo-Aryan and Dravidian languages. If you happen to know about language families, these are two major language families in India, and some of you will be learning about it later. So, Indo-Aryan and Dravidian languages converge, they are in contact, and as a result of convergence there are some complex contact varieties. So, there has been a very interesting study after 40 years, 40 years after the study was done by Gumpers and Wilson, the new study called 40 years of this language change of this Kupwar village study. So, by Kulkarni Joshi. So, Kulkarni Joshi is claiming that there is language divergence now in the same area. Why is this language divergence happening? Because of the creation of new state boundaries. So, it is very interesting in Indian context to know that there was convergence in one area and then divergence in the same area happening because of some extra linguistic factors. So, when we talk about sound change in progress, let me talk about the study of Martha's Vineyard, which is a classical study by William Labov again. So, Labov did a couple of studies which are considered as landmark studies in sociolinguistics, theoretical sociolinguistics. So, I will quickly talk about the study of Martha's Vineyard, and which is basically done with the basis of some comparable sets of data from two periods, and there is focus on sound changes in progress. So, Martha's Vineyard is a small island in Massachusetts in the coast, and it has a small population, but there are a lot of tourists who flock during the holidaying seasons. So, the inhabitants of the island were asked to produce words with I and OW. So, I and OW, the diphthongs, if you know the term diphthong, and this is something that was purposefully done. So, Labov designed the methodology in such a way that the respondents will have to use I and OW, and it was found that the vowels are pronounced differently, which is different from the standard American pronunciation. So, why is this being done? Because it suggested that the islanders tried to assert their identity as an islander and make a difference with the standard American pronunciation. So, it was centralized. Now, you know it was used with schwa. So, O and I, maybe I am not pronouncing it perfectly because I am not a I am just trying to understand this, but it is mostly done by young men. This is something that we should note. It is mostly done by young men, and a linguistic divide between islanders and non-islanders are done here. At this point, you can also ask yourself about the attitude of the islanders. So, how was the attitudes of the islanders towards the tourists? Was it friendly or non-friendly? Why did they need to assert their identity through the creation of a new kind of pronunciation, a centralized vowel? Language change has also a direct relationship with gender. So, I will mention two important studies in this regard. Trudgill 1972 did a study in Norwich, and it was found that women use the forms of the standard more frequently than men. The question is why? You can say the women wanted to challenge their social position, which is always a subordinate position. So, say identified themselves, or they tried to show solidarity with the standard language speakers. Another study by Jenny Cheshire in 1978 done at Reading was a study where it was found that lower class young boys use more non-standard forms in syntax. So, again we can see that it's like mostly study on adolescents. So, it was found that again in terms of syntax we can find that girls are using more standard forms. Maybe the reason is the same one, to challenge their subordinate position and to identify themselves with the standard speakers, to show the solidarity with them. So, if we talk about change from above and change from below, we can see that there is a difference. What is above and why we are saying above? Because we are talking about some kind of hierarchy, right. So, we can say that change from below is a conscious awareness, and change from above is actually not so conscious. It has to be not so conscious. Change from below is systematic, change from above is not. Change from above may not be initiated by the highest social group, and women are inclined to show solidarity with the socially powerful, while men exhibit solidarity with the peers. So, at the end I will also tell you about a different kind of method in language change or different kind of analysis in language change, which is lexical diffusion. What is lexical diffusion? You are familiar with this word lexical, and now you learnt about diffusion as well in terms of wave model. So, a sound change spreads gradually through the words in which the change applies. So, spreading gradually is basically the idea of diffusion, right. So, you can say that change does not proceed at a uniform rate through the affected vocabulary. We are saying vocabulary because we are concerned about the lexical items at this point. We can say that there is an initial period of slow change, which is like 20% of the relevant words which will undergo the change. Then a shorter period of time where we have a rapid change for 60% of the words, and finally, there will be again much the same length as the initial period when it will slow down, and there is often a residue. So, Lebov said that lexical diffusion has a very limited role to play in change. So, we also have to keep in mind, and Lebov mostly did work on sound change, but people who are working on syntactic change also learned from Lebov's model. And I also told you in previously that now syntax and social linguistics together are creating a domain, a new emerging domain, where people are talking about structural change with the help of both the domains. So, coming to the conclusion, let us quickly go through whatever we have learned today. We talked about the idea of temporal variation. We said that the idea of real time and apparent time are useful for us in order to understand temporal variation and change as well, you can add. So, language change takes place across space and social group. So, geographically you can account for it, and also based on different social groups, like the Martha's Vineyard study, you can say one social group is actually talking about the change. And let me also tell you at this point that the change is initiated by the islanders, but later it was spread, it was generalized, it was used by others as well. So, it was established. And historical linguistics modeled different sound changes. We did talk about the tree model and the alternative model or the wave model here. We said that language change is related to the identity of the speakers. So, for example, when we talked about gender, we found that women are basically using more standards in order to challenge their subordinate position. We said that language change can occur from both above and below. And finally, we said that lexical diffusion can explain language change too. So, these are the key references. Thank you.